My granddaughter's words echoed in the cavernous courtroom, each one a hammer blow against my heart. I was, she swore to the judge, the meanest grandfather in the world. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The evidence I was about to present would cast a long shadow on who the truly damaging influence was. I'm grateful you're here to hear my side of things. Follow this story to its conclusion and tell me the city you're from, so I can see just how far this painful chapter of my life has traveled. A profound hush fell over the room. The air grew thick and still. I could feel the weight of every gaze turning toward me, the judge from his elevated bench, the court reporter with her fingers poised over the stenotype machine, my own lawyer, and even the uniformed bailiff standing impassively by the heavy oak doors. But of all the eyes on me, the only ones that truly shattered my soul belonged to Tina. My 6-year-old granddaughter stared at me with an unwavering conviction as she repeated the awful words her father, Victor, had so clearly drilled into her head. Grandpa Arthur is mean. He's the meanest grandpa in the whole wide world. A tightness seized my chest, each syllable stabbing more deeply than any knife could. This was the same little girl who used to launch herself into my arms the moment I walked through the door. The one who would plead for sleepovers at my house on weekends. The one who affectionately called me her workshop grandpa because we were always building birdhouses or model airplanes together. Now, she looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. No, it was worse than that. She looked at me with an expression of genuine fear. Victor sat right beside her, his hand resting on her small shoulder, his face a perfect, calculated mask of paternal concern. To any uninformed observer, he was merely comforting his child through an agonizing moment. But I saw through the facade. I saw the almost imperceptible upward curl of his lips, the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. He had masterminded this entire scene flawlessly. The judge's voice was gentle as he leaned forward. "Tina," he said softly, "can you tell me why you think your grandfather is mean?" Tina glanced up at her father, who gave her a subtle, encouraging nod. "He tries to take me away from Daddy," she said, her voice tiny but sounding rehearsed. "He says bad things about Daddy. He makes my brother Evan cry." Every single accusation was a cruel distortion of the truth. I had never made any attempt to take the children. I had simply asked the court to enforce my legally appointed visitation rights, which Victor had consistently and repeatedly denied. I never spoke a negative word about him in front of the children, though heaven knows I had more than enough reason to. And Evan's tears? Those tears fell only when our visits were over and I had to return him to his father's house, a direct result of him not wanting to leave, not from any action of mine. My eyes drifted to Evan, who was sitting silently next to his court-appointed advocate. At 6 years old, Tina's twin brother seemed to have withdrawn into himself, his gaze fixed on his little hands, which were folded neatly in his lap. He refused to look at me, but I noted that he wouldn't look at his father either. This entire nightmare had started 3 years prior, when my daughter Jessica married Victor after a romance that had moved at lightning speed. I'd harbored concerns from the very beginning. The speed with which Victor moved in, the way he methodically isolated Jessica from her circle of friends, the subtle, critical remarks he'd make about her close relationship with me. But I kept my thoughts to myself. Jessica seemed genuinely happy, and the twins seemed to adore him. Who was I to interfere with that? Then the accident happened. My Jessica's company car was struck by a drunk driver on a rain-slicked highway one evening. My only child, gone in the blink of an eye. The grief was a physical force that nearly broke me, but I knew I had to remain strong for Tina and Evan, who had just lost their mother. I tried to be a constant presence for them, to maintain that vital connection and to keep their memories of Jessica alive. That was when Victor's behavior shifted. Or maybe he just dropped the pretense. Arranging visits became an ordeal. My phone calls would ring endlessly, unanswered. The children seemed altered each time I managed to see them. They were quieter, more anxious. Often they seemed ravenous, and their clothes were frequently ill-fitting. When I gently brought up my concerns, Victor accused me of criticizing his parenting skills. When I offered financial help, he claimed I was overstepping my boundaries. And whenever I mentioned Jessica's name, he'd cut me off, saying I was dwelling on the past and upsetting the children. Then came the day I went to pick Evan up from school for our court-approved visit and discovered dark bruises on his arm. When I asked him what had happened, he dissolved into tears, begging me not to tell his father that he had told me. That was the precise moment I knew, with chilling certainty, that I had to fight for their custody, regardless of the personal or financial cost. I just never imagined that fight would lead me to this moment, with my own granddaughter testifying against me, brainwashed into believing I was the villain of her story. "Mr. Dawson, my lawyer, Mr. Dawson," Garrett whispered, his voice pulling me back to the sterile reality of the courtroom. "It's our turn to present our evidence." I gave a slow nod, stealing one last look at Tina. Just for a second, behind the rehearsed animosity, I saw a flicker of confusion in her young eyes. That fleeting glimpse gave me the strength I needed to rise to my feet and fight for what those children so desperately deserved: a life of safety, stability, and the unconditional love their mother would have demanded for them. Looking back, I should have seen it all coming. The warning signs were there, as bright and obvious as flashing red lights at a railroad crossing. I had simply chosen to ignore them for the sake of keeping the peace, for my daughter Jessica's happiness, and later, for the twins. Victor entered our lives like a sudden storm. Jessica met him at a co-worker's wedding, and in less than 3 months, they were engaged. 6 months after that, they were married. The whole timeline was so compressed that I barely had a moment to catch my breath and process the monumental changes unfolding. "Dad, when you know, you just know," Jessica had told me, her eyes shining with that kind of intoxicating love that can blind you to all else. I forced a smile and embraced her, swallowing the lump of unease in my throat. She was 32, a successful professional, and had always been level-headed. Who was I to second-guess her judgment? The first real red flag popped up during the wedding planning. I had offered my help with the arrangements, suggesting I could even build the decorative arch for the ceremony, a family tradition I had started for my own wedding. Victor's rejection was polite on the surface, but unmistakably firm. "That's so thoughtful, Arthur, but I've already hired a professional event designer. This day needs to be perfect." His pointed emphasis on the word perfect made me feel as though my homespun contribution would somehow cheapen his grand vision. Jessica looked uncomfortable, but remained silent. That set a precedent that would become a recurring pattern. Victor would make a decision, Jessica would quietly acquiesce, and I would take a step back. After they were married, the distance between us widened. The Sunday dinners at my house, a cherished tradition since Jessica was a little girl, dwindled to monthly gatherings, and then to events that happened only once a season. Every time, Victor had a ready excuse. He was exhausted from work, they were too busy with a project, or he just wanted a quiet weekend at home. Jessica eventually stopped coming over by herself, explaining with a strained smile, "We're a package deal now, Dad." When the twins were born, I held out hope that things would change for the better. I assumed Victor would welcome some help with 2 newborns. I cleared my entire schedule, fully prepared to be the most hands-on, doting grandfather imaginable. But Victor arranged for his own father to move in with them. Instead, a man who lived 6 states away and whom Jessica had only met on 2 brief occasions. Victor's just more comfortable with his own dad right now, Jessica explained, her eyes avoiding mine. Just give him some time. Time? I gave him years. I bit my tongue when he criticized the way I held the babies. I said nothing when he completely rearranged the nursery that Jessica and I had so lovingly prepared together. I remained silent when he dismissed the hand-carved rocking horses I'd spent months crafting for the twins, claiming they were unsafe. The most telling incident occurred on the twins' 3rd birthday. I had bought them each a small tricycle. They were nothing extravagant, just cheerful little bikes with colorful streamers on the handlebars. Victor took one look at them and said coolly, "Oh, we don't have space for these. The children have far too many toys as it is." Later that evening, I overheard him on the phone, laughing with someone. "You won't believe it. Arthur bought these hideous tricycles, as if we'd ever let the kids ride those death traps." Jessica found me in the kitchen, my face wet with tears I couldn't hold back. For the first time, she confronted Victor. Their argument was heated, filled with sharp words I'd never heard my daughter use before. The next day, she brought the tricycles over to my house and asked if I could keep them there for when the children visited. "He's just really protective, Dad," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "The kids are his entire world." That was precisely the problem. They were his times world, not our times world. They weren't a shared family joy, but his exclusive possession. Then the accident. A rainy Thursday night, a drunk driver, and my daughter was gone forever. I can still vividly recall receiving that phone call, the way my legs buckled beneath me, the feeling of being unable to draw a breath. In the depths of my own grief, my first thought was of the twins, of how I could possibly help them grasp that their mommy wasn't coming home. But Victor shut me out completely. "We need space to process this as a family," he told me curtly at the funeral, physically positioning himself between me and the twins. "I'll call you when we're ready for visitors." That call never came. When I finally managed to see the twins 2 weeks later, they seemed unsure of who I was. Tina, who used to scramble into my lap the second I arrived, hid behind Victor's legs. Evan reached out for me, but Victor swiftly pulled him back, saying, "He's just too emotional right now." I had to file a formal petition for grandparent visitation rights just to be able to see them. The court granted me 1 weekend a month and 2 phone calls a week. Even those court-ordered interactions became battlegrounds. The children were suddenly too busy for calls. They were mysteriously sick on my designated weekends. When I did finally get them, they would arrive hungry, their clothes and hair unwashed, and wearing outfits that were either too small or completely inappropriate for the weather. Evan once whispered to me, "Daddy says we can't tell you stuff, or you'll try to take us away." I started documenting everything. The missed visitations, the children's deteriorating physical condition, their troubling little comments. Each time I tried to express my concern to Victor, he accused me of trying to undermine his authority. The final straw came 9 months ago. During a rare, approved visit, Evan came out of the bathroom, his face streaked with silent tears. When I knelt down and gently asked him what was wrong, he hesitantly lifted the back of his t-shirt. My breath caught in my throat. Across his small back were the distinct, ugly dark marks of a handprint. "Daddy's friend, Rebecca? She did it?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "She said I was making too much noise." That night, immediately after returning the children, I called Child Protective Services. The subsequent investigation found nothing conclusive. Victor claimed the marks were from a fall at the playground. But something inside me hardened that day. A resolve formed. I knew I could no longer stand by and watch. These children needed a protector. I filed for full custody the very next day, setting into motion the chain of events that brought us to this courtroom, to my granddaughter calling me the meanest grandfather in the world, and to the mountain of evidence I was now about to present. Evidence that would expose exactly who was truly harming these innocent children. For the first time since Jessica's death, I felt her presence beside me, as if she were urging me forward. Fight for them, Dad. I could almost hear her say. Don't you dare give up. And I wouldn't. Not with their safety and their entire futures hanging in the balance. The first piece of solid evidence I collected came from a source I hadn't expected. Miss Wallace, the twins' kindergarten teacher. I had scheduled a parent-teacher conference, a right I still legally held despite Victor's furious objections. Miss Wallace, a petite woman with kind, worried eyes and a soft voice, seemed anxious from the moment I arrived. She kept glancing at the classroom door as if expecting someone to burst in. "Mr. Dawson," she began quietly, after closing the door behind us, "I'm so glad you came. There are a few things we need to talk about regarding the twins." My heart immediately plummeted. "Are they having trouble with their schoolwork?" She shook her head. "No, not at all. They're both very bright children. She paused, then carefully pulled a thick folder from a locked drawer in her desk. "I've been documenting some of my concerns." Inside were pages of dated notes stretching back for months. Evan showing up to school, wearing the same dirty clothes for 3 consecutive days. Tina falling asleep during morning circle time, having told Miss Wallace that they had to stay up late for Daddy's parties. Both children were frequently famished, wolfing down their school lunches and then asking if there was any more food. "Just last week, Miss," Wallace said, lowering her voice even further, "Tina told me that sometimes they don't have dinner at home because Daddy forgets to make it." She then showed me a collection of drawings the twins had made during art time. Evan's pictures depicted a house shrouded by dark, angry clouds, with stick figures drawn with downturned mouths. Tina's drawing showed what appeared to be adults lying on couches, surrounded by numerous bottles scattered across the floor. "I've brought these concerns to the school counselor, Mrs. Martinez." "Miss Brought," Wallace continued, "but Victor always has a plausible explanation. The children are being overly dramatic, or they're just going through a phase. He even brought in a doctor's note claiming Evan has food allergies that cause behavioral problems." I frowned. "Evan doesn't have any food allergies." "I suspected as much," Miss Wallace said, biting her lip. "Mr. Dawson, I've been an educator for 22 years. I know the difference between a child with allergies and a child who is being neglected." She hesitated, then added, "The school administration is reluctant to file an official report with CPS. Mr. A.T.'s CPS, Martinez, can be quite intimidating. He's threatened legal action in the past when other concerns were raised." "You're afraid?" I realized aloud. Miss Wallace looked down, a hint of shame in her eyes. "I have my own children to think about. I can't afford to risk my job." But then she pushed the folder across the desk toward me. "You can use this. I've made copies of everything." That night, sleep was impossible. The folder sat on my nightstand, its contents a heavy weight on my conscience. I kept picturing the twins hungry, exhausted, and bewildered. I imagined Jessica looking down, her heart breaking over what was happening to her children. The next morning, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. *, check your email. Evidence you need. *. The sender was Maria, a woman who had been Victor's long-term girlfriend before he met Jessica. They had dated for 3 years, and she had reached out after seeing my name in the public court filings. Her email was filled with photos and videos from the time she and Victor had lived together. There were images of Victor drunk in the middle of the day, screaming at her young nephew, who was over for a visit. A video showed Victor smashing dishes against a wall during an argument. There were also screenshots of text messages in which he threatened to harm himself if she ever tried to leave him. Asterisk. He is manipulative and volatile. Asterisk, Maria wrote. Asterisk. I didn't say anything when he married your daughter, because I was just so relieved to be free of him. I am willing to testify if you need me to. Those kids deserve so much better. Asterisk. Armed with this new information, I hired a private investigator. The report he delivered 2 weeks later made my blood run cold. Victor was leaving the 6-year-old twins home alone several nights a week, often not returning until the early hours of the morning. He had a revolving door of women staying over, some of whom had criminal records. The children were often left unfed, unbathed, and completely unsupervised. The investigator had photographic evidence of Evan waiting by the elementary school's front door for 40 minutes after dismissal, while Victor sat in his car in the parking lot, either asleep or intoxicated. He had documented Tina wandering their suburban neighborhood alone at dusk, knocking on doors and asking for food. The most damning piece of evidence was an audio recording captured from a listening device placed legally on the public sidewalk outside their home. It recorded Victor's voice, sharp and menacing, screaming at the children. Asterisk. If you tell your grandpa anything, they will take you away and you will never see me again. Is that what you want? To be all alone? Asterisk. The twins' voices were small and terrified. Asterisk. No, Daddy, we won't tell. Asterisk. With trembling hands, I compiled every piece of it. Miss Wallace's detailed documentation, Maria's damning evidence, the private investigator's chilling report, and my own meticulous records of missed visits and the children's declining state. I had been slowly gathering the pieces of a horrifying puzzle, and now the completed picture was undeniable and impossible to ignore. When I presented the entire file to my lawyer, Mr. Garrett, he reviewed it in silence, his expression growing progressively grimmer with each page he turned. "This is extremely compelling, Arthur," he said at last, "but you have to understand. Victor will fight back with everything he has. He will try to paint you as a vindictive father-in-law, trying to steal his children." He looked me straight in the eye. "Are you prepared for how ugly this is about to get?" I thought of Tina's fearful eyes in the courtroom. I thought of the bruises on Evan's back. I thought of the desperate way they ate whenever they were with me, as if they were never sure when their next meal would come. "I don't care what he says about me," I said, my voice firm. "Those children need someone to fight for them. Jessica can't do it anymore. It has to be me." Mr. Garrett nodded, a new look of respect in his eyes. "All right then, let's file for an emergency custody order. With this evidence, we have a very strong case." That filing led directly to the hearing where Tina would call me the meanest grandfather in the world. But I knew the truth now, and I was not going to back down. Not when those children's safety was at stake. I would protect them, even if they ended up hating me for it. That, I realized, is what being a grandfather truly means. The days leading up to the formal custody hearing were the longest and most agonizing of my life. Every night, I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind consumed with images of the twins alone in that house. I wondered if they were safe, if they had eaten dinner, if anyone had bothered to tuck them in and read them a bedtime story. I would find myself lost in memories, recalling how Jessica always had to say goodnight to her stuffed giraffe until she was 12 years old, and how deeply she would have wanted her own children to feel that same profound sense of security she had known growing up. My attorney, Mr. Garrett, warned me repeatedly about what to anticipate. "Victor will use every weapon in his arsenal," he stated during our final strategy session. "He will portray you as a controlling, interfering old man who can't accept that you are not their parent." "I know I'm not their parent," I replied quietly. "I'm just trying to be what their mother would want me to be, their protector." Mr. Garrett's professional expression softened for a moment. "The judge will see the evidence, Arthur, but you must prepare yourself for how the children might act in court. If Victor has been coaching them, he has—" I interrupted. "Tina barely even looks at me anymore. Evan just seems terrified all the time. Then you must be ready for them to say things that will hurt you deeply. Can you handle that?" I considered his question with complete honesty. Could I truly bear to hear my own grandchildren, the two people I loved more than life itself, say terrible things about me, things they had been manipulated into saying? "I have to," I finally answered, my voice barely a whisper, "because nobody else is standing up for them." On the morning of the hearing, I dressed with care, choosing a simple navy blue suit. It was nothing flashy, nothing that could be misconstrued as trying too hard. Pinned to my lapel was a small silver heart locket Jessica had given me for Father's Day when she was 16. Her high school graduation picture was still tucked safely inside. It felt like I was carrying a small piece of her strength with me. When I arrived at the courthouse, my neighbor Matthew was waiting for me on the front steps. He had offered to come for moral support, but I hadn't expected him to be there so early. "I couldn't sleep," he confessed, giving me a quick, supportive clap on the shoulder. "I kept thinking about those kids, and about you having to go through this all by yourself." His simple act of kindness nearly brought me to tears. Since Jessica's death, I had grown accustomed to shouldering every burden alone. Having someone just show up, unasked, was a profound and unexpected comfort. "The whole neighborhood is pulling for you, Arthur," Matthew added. "We've all seen how things changed after Jessica passed. We've seen how those children started to look different, less joyful." Inside, the courtroom felt vast and intimidatingly cold. Victor was already present, dressed in a conservative beige suit, his hair perfectly styled. He looked every bit the part of the grieving widower and devoted single father, exactly the image he had meticulously cultivated since the funeral. He was a performer, and he performed flawlessly for an audience. The twins were sitting on a bench in the hallway with their court-appointed guardian ad litem, a stern man named Mr. Patel, who had interviewed me at length. Tina was restlessly kicking her feet against the wooden bench. Evan was sucking his thumb, a habit that, according to Victor's angry comments during past handoffs, he had supposedly outgrown 2 years ago. When Tina saw me, she immediately swiveled around, pressing herself against Mr. Patel's side. Evan offered me the briefest, most fleeting glance before his eyes darted down to his worn-out sneakers. The rejection was a physical sting, but I forced myself to understand. They had been conditioned to see me as a threat, as the person trying to dismantle what was left of their family. "They look so tired," Matthew whispered from the seat beside me. They did. Both children had dark circles under their eyes. Tina's shirt was buttoned incorrectly, and Evan's hair was matted on one side, as if it hadn't been brushed. These were small details that the judge might not notice, but to me they screamed volumes about the state of their care. When the proceedings began, I sat and listened as Victor's attorney painted a portrait of me as an overbearing father-in-law, unable to accept that my daughter had married and created her own family unit. He described how I had allegedly harassed Victor with incessant phone calls and unannounced visits, how I had undermined his parenting at every opportunity, and how I had used my financial resources to try to buy the children's affection. Each accusation was a grotesque twisting of reality. My harassment consisted of worried calls when the children had been marked absent from school. My undermining was feeding hungry children and washing their soiled clothes. My buying affection was providing them with the basic necessities that Victor consistently neglected. Then came the time for the children to speak to the judge in his private chambers. Tina went first. When she returned, her eyes were red and puffy, and she refused to look at either me or her father. Evan went next. He was in there for a much longer time. While we waited, Victor's phone buzzed incessantly. He checked it again and again, his agitation growing with each message. At one point, he excused himself to take a call in the hallway. Through the partially open door, I could overhear his harsh, whispered words. "No, you can't come over tonight. I'm in court, you idiot. No, the kids will be here. I don't care what you want." When Evan finally emerged from the judge's chambers, he looked directly at me for the first time all day. Something in his expression was different. It might have been a flicker of hope, or perhaps relief. My heart began to pound in my chest. Had he told the truth? I would learn later that Evan had, in fact, started to open up to the judge. He had mentioned Rebecca, Victor's girlfriend, and the one who had left the bruises. He had described long nights left alone while his daddy went to parties. But when the judge asked him directly if he wanted to live with his father or his grandfather, he had frozen, too terrified to give an answer. As we were called back into open court, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Whatever the outcome, I knew I had done everything in my power to protect these children. I had finally broken my silence, meticulously gathered evidence, and fought for them against all odds. Jessica would have been proud of that at least. The judge then called for Tina to testify in open court, a decision that clearly surprised both legal teams. And that's when my granddaughter, her small voice trembling, looked at me and called me the meanest grandfather in the world. In that gut-wrenching moment, looking at her frightened little face, I made a silent vow. Asterisk. Even if you hate me for this now, I will never stop fighting for you. Someday, you will understand why. Asterisk. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence pertaining to the children's living conditions, Mr. Garrett announced, his voice steady and professional. The judge nodded, and Mr. W. Garrett began to methodically lay out the documentation we had compiled. He presented school attendance records that showed a pattern of frequent absences and tardiness. He displayed the investigators' photographs showing the twins wandering their neighborhood unsupervised. He submitted medical records that indicated missed doctor's appointments and significant delays in their necessary vaccinations. Victor's attorney objected at every turn, arguing that the evidence was unethically obtained or being presented out of context. The judge overruled the majority of his objections, his own expression growing visibly more concerned with each new exhibit. Then, Miss Wallace took the stand. She spoke quietly, but with unshakable conviction about her observations in the classroom. The children's constant hunger, their persistent fatigue, their deeply concerning artwork, and the troubling comments they made about their home life. Tina once told me that sometimes they just eat cereal for dinner because Daddy's bedroom door is locked and he won't come out, she said. Evan frequently comes to school in the same clothes he wore the previous day, sometimes with noticeable food stains on them. Victor's face remained a composed mask, but I saw his fingers gripping the edge of the defense table so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Next to testify was Maria. She described Victor's volatile and explosive behavior during their relationship and his frightening tendency to manipulate people to get whatever he wanted. She produced text messages where he had threatened self-harm when she tried to end their relationship, and she recounted incidents of pure rage that left her fearing for her own safety. I believe he is fully capable of using those children as pawns to hurt others, she concluded. "I've seen him manipulate people before. He doesn't seem to understand or care about the harm he causes." Throughout these testimonies, I maintained a neutral expression, as Mr. Garrett had advised. Inside, however, I was trembling with a complex mix of vindication and profound sorrow. None of this was a revelation to me, but hearing it all stated so plainly in a court of law made the tragedy of the situation feel more real and more heartbreaking than ever. Then came the moment that would change everything. Mr. Garrett played the audio recording captured by the private investigator. Victor's voice filled the silent courtroom, screaming at the twins, threatening them, telling them they would be taken away forever if they spoke to me about what was happening at home. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The judge's expression had hardened into a dark scowl. Even Victor's own attorney looked stunned. "Mr. Martinez," the judge said, his voice cold and stern, "would you care to explain this recording?" Victor straightened in his chair. "That recording is taken completely out of context, Your Honor," he said smoothly. "I was simply explaining the complex court procedures to the children. They were confused and frightened by all this legal action their grandfather has initiated." The judge did not look convinced. "And the allegations of neglect? The children being left alone at night? The missed days of school? Your Honor, I am a single father, doing the best that I can," Victor replied, his voice catching with practiced emotion. "Since my wife's death, it has been an immense struggle. Mr. Dawson has never approved of me, and he is now using this tragedy as an opportunity to try and take my children from me. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood." His ability to twist the truth into a believable performance was astonishing. For one terrifying moment, I feared the judge might actually be swayed by it. Then, a small voice cut through the tension. "That's not true." Every head in the courtroom turned. Evan had stood up from his seat beside Mr. Patel. His small face was pale, but his expression was resolute. "Evan, honey, sit down," Victor said sharply. But Evan took another step forward. "Daddy does leave us alone. A lot. He says we're big kids now, and we don't need babysitters." Mr. Patel placed a gentle hand on Evan's shoulder, but made no move to stop him. "Tina and me, we get scared when it gets dark," Evan continued, his voice gaining strength. "And sometimes we're really, really hungry. Grandpa Arthur always makes sure we have lots of food." Victor's face contorted with a flash of pure fury. "Evan, stop talking right now." "Mr. Martinez," the judge warned, his voice like iron, "do not address the child." Evan looked directly at the judge, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Daddy told Tina to say Grandpa is mean. He made us practice it over and over. He took a shaky breath. He said if we didn't do it right, they'd take us away from him forever." Tina, who had been sitting in stone-faced silence, suddenly burst into tears. "I don't want to lie anymore," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I didn't mean it." The judge immediately called for a recess, ordering that the children be taken to a separate, quiet room with Mr. Patel. As they were being led out, Evan glanced back at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in months: trust. When court resumed, the judge addressed Victor directly. "Mr. Martinez, the evidence presented in this courtroom today, coupled with the children's own spontaneous statements, raises the most serious concerns about your fitness as a parent." Victor started to protest, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him. "I am ordering a full and immediate investigation by Child Protective Services. Until that investigation is complete, temporary emergency custody of the children will be granted to their grandfather, Mr. Dawson." The air rushed out of my lungs in a single gasp. Asterisk. Temporary custody. Asterisk. The twins would be safe. Victor exploded. "You can't do this! They're my children! He's turning them against me!" As bailiffs moved to contain his outburst, the judge continued, his voice firm and unwavering. "Mr. Martinez, this very outburst only serves to reinforce my concerns. You will be granted supervised visitation rights, pending the outcome of the investigation." I sat perfectly still, almost afraid to breathe, terrified that any movement might somehow reverse the judge's decision. Beside me, Mr. Garrett squeezed my hand. "It's just the first step," he whispered, "but it's a big one." As I left the courtroom, Matthew was waiting in the hall. He pulled me into a tight hug. "You did it, Arthur," he said. "Those babies are going to be okay now." But as I glanced back at Victor's face, which was contorted with rage as he spoke heatedly with his attorney, I knew this battle was far from over. He wouldn't give them up so easily. And despite the victory today, rebuilding my relationship with Tina and Evan, a relationship that had been so deliberately poisoned, would require a long journey of time and patience. Still, for the first time since Jessica's death, I felt a flicker of real hope that her children would finally have the chance to grow up in a safe, stable, and loving home, just as she would have wanted. That first night with the twins back in my home was a delicate mixture of wonderful and heartbreaking. Evan clung to me, trailing me from room to room as if he were afraid I might vanish if he let me out of his sight. Tina, however, kept her distance, watching us with uncertain eyes, clearly still grappling with the guilt from her testimony in the courtroom. I had meticulously prepared their old rooms, the ones they always used during weekend visits in happier times. I'd put fresh sheets on their beds, dinosaurs for Evan, butterflies for Tina. Their favorite stuffed animals were waiting on their pillows, and the bookshelves were stocked with the stories we used to read together before everything changed. After a simple dinner of chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese comfort food, they eagerly ate instead of just pushing around their plates. I helped them with their bedtime routine. As I tucked Evan in, he grabbed my hand. "Are we really staying here now?" he asked, his voice small in the soft glow of his nightlight. "For a while, yes," I answered carefully. "The judge decided it would be good for you and Tina to stay with me until some things get sorted out. Is Daddy in trouble?" I chose my words with great care, remembering the social worker's advice. "Your daddy is going through a very tough time right now. He's getting some help so he can learn to be a better mom." Evan was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, "I was scared to tell the truth. I thought you'd be mad at me." I gently brushed the hair back from his forehead. "Evan, sweetheart, I could never, ever be mad at you for telling the truth. What you did was very brave." "Tina's mad at herself," he confided. "She thinks she was bad for saying you were mean." "I'll go talk to her," I promised. Tina's door was closed but not fully latched. I knocked softly before pushing it open. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, clutching the stuffed triceratops her mother had given her for her 4th birthday. "Hey, buddy," I said gently, keeping my distance so as not to crowd her. "Can I come in?" She nodded without looking up. I sat on the edge of her bed, leaving space between us. "I lied," she said finally, her voice cracking. "I said you were mean, but you're not." "Tina, look at me," I said softly. She reluctantly raised her eyes to meet mine. "You were trying to protect your dad. You were scared. I understand that. But I hurt your feelings." "Yes," I admitted, knowing that honesty was the only path forward. "It did hurt my feelings, but I know you didn't really mean it. Sometimes, when we're afraid, we say things we don't mean." Her lower lip trembled. "Is Dad going to hate me now?" "Your dad could never hate you," I assured her, though in my heart I wasn't sure Victor was capable of the kind of unconditional love these children deserved. "He's your father. He just needs some time to work on himself. Tina seemed to consider this. Then she asked the question I had been dreading. Is Dad ever coming back for us? I took a deep breath. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, I said honestly. But I can promise you this. You will always be safe here, and you will always be loved. She nodded, and for the first time since I had picked them up from the courthouse, she leaned against me, allowing a brief, tentative hug before pulling away again. Progress, I realized, would come in these small, quiet moments. Trust would have to be rebuilt, one day at a time. The weeks that followed settled into a new, comforting rhythm. School drop-offs and pickups, homework spread across the kitchen table, regular meal times, and consistent early bedtimes, the simple, sturdy framework of stability that children need to thrive. There were challenges, of course. For the first month, nightmares frequently woke them both. Tina had occasional, explosive tantrums when she got frustrated, lashing out in ways that made it clear she'd never been taught healthier ways to express her emotions. Evan started hoarding food in his bedroom, granola bars and apples tucked away under his mattress, a heartbreaking sign of the food insecurity he had lived with. The supervised visits with Victor were incredibly difficult. He would arrive bearing expensive toys and making grandiose promises about all the things they would do in the future, which left the twins confused and emotionally exhausted. After each visit, we would experience setbacks, bedwetting incidents, extreme clinginess, and behavioral problems at school. The court-appointed therapist, Dr. Chen, became our lifeline. She worked with the twins twice a week, helping them navigate and articulate their complicated feelings. She also counseled me on how to provide the unwavering support they needed without demonizing their relationship with their father, as difficult as that sometimes felt. Children can love an imperfect parent, she explained during one of our sessions. Your role isn't to replace their father, but to provide the stability and security that he is currently unable to offer. 3 months after the initial hearing, the court made its final ruling. Based on the comprehensive CPS investigation, the therapy reports, and Victor's continued erratic behavior during his supervised visits, I was granted full legal custody of the twins. Victor would retain his visitation rights, but only under strict supervision until he successfully completed court-ordered parenting classes and a substance abuse treatment program. He stormed out of the courtroom before the judge had even finished speaking, his furious gaze burning into me as he passed. That evening, as the twins and I worked together in the vegetable garden Jessica had helped me plant years ago, Evan looked up from the carrots he was pulling. Grandpa Arthur, are you happy that we live with you now? I set down my trowel, giving his earnest question the consideration it deserved. I am happy that you are both safe and that you're doing so well, I said carefully. I wish the circumstances were different. I wish your mommy was still here and that your daddy was able to take good care of you. But yes, having you both here with me brings me more joy than I can say. Tina, who had been unusually quiet, walked over with a handful of cherry tomatoes. Mom would be happy we're with you, she said with a surprising amount of certainty. She always said you were the best dad ever. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. She did say that, didn't she? And now you're the best grandpa ever, Evan added matter-of-factly. Not mean at all. I let out a laugh, my heart feeling fuller than it had in years. Well, I don't know about all that. I still make you eat your vegetables and do your homework. That's not being mean, Tina said with the seriousness only a child can muster. That's just being a grown-up. 6 months turned into a year. We settled into our new normal. The twins blossomed at school, made new friends in the neighborhood, and gradually stopped flinching at loud noises or hiding food. Victor's visits became less dramatic as he progressed through his treatment, though I remained ever vigilant and protective. On the second anniversary of Jessica's death, the three of us visited her grave together. The twins placed handmade drawings next to the bouquet of flowers I had brought. As they ran off to explore a nearby magnolia tree, I sat on the bench facing Jessica's headstone. "We're going to be okay," I told her softly. "It's not the life any of us planned, but I'm keeping my promise. I'm taking care of them." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the trees above me, and for a moment, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. This journey had been more difficult than I could have ever imagined, filled with more heartache and struggle than one person should have to bear. But as I watched the twins playing in the dappled sunlight, their laughter carrying on the wind, I knew that every single painful step had been worth it. They were safe. They were loved. And somehow, against all odds, we had become a family again. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.